Hello everyone. Today we're going to be looking at sensory and behavioural difficulties and differences associated with autism. I'll just bring up the PowerPoint straight away now. There we go. So we're looking at understanding the behaviour and sensory issues associated with autism. So, brief introduction as to what is autism. Again, it's just a brief introduction because I want to go straight into looking at the core differences in autistic individuals, particularly with regard to sensory issues, behavioural difficulties. Then I've got a little introduction to general support strategies at the end, just a little introduction, because the final part of this series will be another presentation where we're looking at more specific and more detail on support strategies. So to begin with, what is autism? Brief recap: autism is a lifelong condition that affects how people communicate, relate to other people, and how they experience the world around them. That's from NHS Scotland. I think it's a very good description of what autism is, rather than describing it as a lifelong developmental disability, because not everyone that's autistic will have a disability, although they will have some developmental delays as a child. So disability, therefore, in those people particularly, results from the attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. This is where I differ between myself and some autistic individuals. Some autistic individuals do not like to consider themselves as having a disability, despite the fact they have autism. But I would dispute that every person that's autistic does have a disability, even if it's the result of how society and other people perceive us. In other words, we're disabled by society, even if we're not in ourselves disabled, because we may or may not have an intellectual disability. So reality to an autistic person is a confusing, interacting mass of events, people, places, sounds, and sights. There seem to be no clear boundaries, order, or meaning to anything. A large part of my life is spent just trying to work out the pattern behind everything. So, as I've mentioned in previous presentations, to be given a diagnosis of autism, a person must exhibit traits in all of these particular areas: social communication, how you communicate with others; social interaction, how you interact with others; and rigidity of thought, in order to be diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum. So, as I just mentioned, all three of those must be present for a diagnosis, and they're going to be in different degrees depending on the individual, because every person that's autistic is going to be unique. And indeed, because it's a developmental disorder when you're young, how you present a child may be very different to how you present as an older child, adolescent, or an adult, because you're going to learn as your brain develops. You're going to learn from your peers, you're going to learn from parents, you're going to learn from teachers. So your place upon that spectrum may change, but they're still going to have differences in these three key areas, which is going to make you autistic and neurodiverse. So these issues, these symptoms must be present before the age of 3. And the severity of each, as I've said, will vary between individuals and within individuals over time. Now, even myself, I may consider myself to be fairly capable, fairly able, fairly intellectual, but when sensory issues and social issues overpower me, I can have a meltdown. More on that later. And for want of another word, I become more autistic, more disabled by my autism, or how other people perceive us, or how society and the environment is weighing heavily upon my shoulders. So those incidences, I may not, and other people may not be performing within their developmental level. So even if you're on the autism spectrum, your position, your place within that spectrum can change depending on circumstances on any given time or any given day. So impairments of social understanding may include aloofness, indifference to other people, bit of a loner, not playing alongside young child might play alongside other people rather than with them, not really acknowledge their presence, may passively accept social contact, may repel it entirely, may be spontaneous but odd, producing inappropriate or repetitive ways with little or no attention to responses, almost like trapped in their own little world. Interactions tend to be very often one-way traffic, i.e. not reciprocal. We're not reciprocating what how someone responds to ourselves. And some autistic people lack empathy, the theory of mind, or others have double empathy, more empathy than most people, and their social disability, as it were, is how other people struggle to understand them rather than simply them struggling to understand and get it into the mindset of a neurotypical person. So, impairment of social understanding may include expressions of emotions that are often inappropriate or extreme, may have a flat, dull, neutral face all the time, may have a fixed grin, may laugh inappropriately, and may behave in a certain way, may expect other people to know their thoughts and feelings instinctively, and may appear withdrawn, introverted, or over-familiar. Can make personal comments without understanding that it may cause offence. For example, in this illustration here, do you like my new hat? No, it's awful. And again, being brutally honest, you're always taught as a child not to lie, but sometimes being brutally honest isn't welcome by most people. But that honesty can be a very useful trait in autism, but it can also backfire greatly because that is not how society expects us to be. We expect us to be subtle, try and understand into somebody's feelings rather than just say the first thing that comes to the top of their head, even if that's completely 100% accurate. So again, theory of mind is really about knowing how to mind read, how to read another's thoughts, and trying to get into their head to understand their beliefs, intents, desires, knowledge, etc. And to understand that others' beliefs, desires, and intentions are different to one's own. For example, I absolutely love Doctor Who, and I kind of understand why anybody wouldn't, but I understand through process of discernment that not everybody's going to want me to talk about Doctor Who for the next 5 hours. They might switch off way before the 5 hours, actually. And others may have difficulty in either maintaining eye contact or may overcompensate because they've been taught as a young child by the parents or school, you must look at people when they're talking to you. So they may overcompensate and stare instead, or look beyond that person. It looks like they're looking at you, but actually looking beyond that person, or they're concentrating on a particular facial feature, like they've got a wart on the nose and they're staring at that. And again, issues with regard to an understanding body language, may not understand what certain expressions mean, certain gesticulations mean, facial expressions. And again, that's been hampered even more recently thanks to COVID. With 50% of your face, I can't even hear me now because my hand over my mouth probably, but 50% of your mouth face covered by a mask, you're having difficulty understanding what person's saying, what their normal voice is. And on top of that, you can't tell if they're smiling or not. It's impossible to tell at the moment if I'm smiling or I'm not, because half my face is covered up. So again, you can appreciate how difficult that must be. And then the difficulties with tactile communication. You may be over tactile or not. And when is it appropriate to touch somebody? When is it? And again, there are no rights and wrongs, and we'll discuss this more as we go into behaviour a bit later on. There is no such thing in my book as a good behaviour and a bad behaviour. It's the behavioural the context in which, or social context in which that behaviour is. And again, holding somebody's hand is fine if it's the person that it's your spouse or it's your little child or whatever. But holding hands with a child you never met might not be a good idea, particularly if you're an adult, because you can then have safeguarding issues against you because it's classed as inappropriate touch, let alone anything even more obvious, shall we say. So, so what do you know about fear of mind? Obviously, this is recording, so I'm not expecting any feedback right now, but obviously feel free to leave comments afterwards. Fear of mind is an important social cognitive skill. It involves developing a sense of what others are thinking and help us to form our responses. For example, when children at a very young age will normally gradually gravitate towards one another. They'll play with each other. Initially, maybe just looking what they're doing, and then they'll join in the group, maybe alongside them, and then they'll join in. An autistic person may not know when it's appropriate to join in, so they'll play alongside that person, or they may either be led by the other person or completely take over, and they're not always aware of those social rules about sharing, about what is an appropriate type of play and what isn't, about, so again, these can cause issues because they're not really understanding how the cause and effect, how their behavior, how they interact may impact on another person, and vice versa. So somebody's crying because maybe I don't know, little Jimmy's hit little Sally and Sally's crying. Little Jimmy might realize that Sally's eyes are leaking, but not really understand why she's crying. He might think she's crying because she's really sad, not because she's sad and in pain, or not that she's in pain. So little snippets like that can be very, very difficult, and they may not interpret those sort of things. And crying actually is quite a good example, because sometimes people cry when they're extremely happy, or they're laughing so much they make them cry. You try and explain that to an autistic person. If you're happy, why are you crying? It's alien concept to many autistic people, particularly young children that are autistic. So impairments in communication may include difficulty making sense of or using all aspects of communication, i.e. verbal, non-verbal. It may range from little or no spoken language to those who appear articulate, and those that do appear articulate can maybe come across as being more capable or more able than they are because of how they're communicating. For example, if someone's got able to use very articulate words, maybe to explain themselves, and it seems like a fairly good way. Do they understand half of what they say? Do they understand the context of what they say? Or is it something that they've seen on a film, they're just repeating something, or it's something they've read, or they're just reading an article verbatim, but not really understanding what it's saying? And conversely, despite the fact they talk the talk, can they appreciate every single word that somebody else is saying to them, or do they have to trouble picking out the important piece in the conversation? So they may have difficulties with what's known as reciprocal conversation, interpreting what other people are saying back to you, and disseminate between the chit chat and the important information, for example, and get eliminating all those filler words that we use in the English language because we love it, and replacing that with the important message that somebody's trying to convey to us. And of course, when it looks at communication, much of human communication, if it's verbal communication, is social. It's not needs-based. It's not based on. It's not essential. It's a social need. It's about building relationships and etc. Rather than simply saying, communicating that you're hungry and what you like to eat. It maybe there's a lot more involved. So again, autistic people may have literal, pedantic, or concrete understanding and use of words, and limited content of speech. And the autistic individuals often find it hard to understand and interpret other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions, as I've previously said, and to predict what will or could happen next. Even things like cause and effect. If I say something, what is likely to be the response from the other person? There's lots of unpredictability about that. And then understanding the concept of danger, engage, and may find it hard to engage in imaginative play, or they may engage in imaginative play in a way that it's extremely imaginative, but bizarre from people that aren't autistic looking in. I may have difficulty preparing for change and planning for the future, particularly things like transitioning from one activity to another, one place to another, etc. And may have difficulty in coping in new or unfamiliar situations. Flexibility of thought again, just to recap, impairments in this ability to think and behave flexibly. Uh, so the autistic person may be shown in restrictive, obsessional, or repetitive activities or interests, and difficulties in developing play skills. Deficits may include difficulties with creative, open-ended activities and more abstract ideas, rigidity and flexibility of thinking and behavior, restricted range of interests and skills pursued in a repetitive manner, and rituals, obsessions, special interests, and an insistence on sameness. If you're finding change difficult, then sameness, that insistence on sameness, is not about being awkward. It's about being able to control your environment. Your environment is so unpredictable, so the autistic person controls it, in other to keep calm, in other to keep a lid on their feelings and their senses. Examples of literal thinking there. That lady there is on top of the world, literally. Cat got your tongue. I just love these pictures. That's obviously raining cats and dogs. Common one here, pull your socks up. We all get told this when we're kids, pull your socks up. And generally it has nothing what to do with putting your socks up, literally. It's about put your idea, get your act together. And again, very, very difficult concepts for some people. And again, that person might be, an autistic person might be really scared if they laugh too much, because they're scared if they laugh too much, show too much hilarity, their head will fall off because of the expression laughing your head off. Again, these may seem quite bizarre and abstract concepts for people that are neurotypical, but for the young autistic child particularly, these can be quite scary ideas. So again, quick recap. To be autistic diagnosis, you need to have some sort of impairment in social communication interaction and restrictive or repetitive patterns of behavior. So why is this obsession with rituals and routines? Well, we're not exactly sure what causes this ritualistic behavior or obsessional behavior, or the need for routines and rituals. And the cause might not be the same for everyone. However, for young children with an autistic spectrum disorder, autistic children, they may have limited play skills, and the special interests can just be something they enjoy. It may just be nothing to do with keeping themselves calm, just something they enjoy doing. Simple as that. And for many autistic children, routines and rituals, as I've just mentioned, can be a response to stress and anxiety. Their communication difficulties can make it harder for them to understand what's happening around them. And this is a very stressful thing. Imagine every single day is like Groundhog Day. You know, you don't know what's laying before you. It's an open book, and oh my Lord. So you're in a constant state of flux, constant state of angst and anxiety. But these special interests, these ritualistic and obsessional behaviors and rituals, let them feel more in control of their environment. If the environment's too much, try to control it, and it makes life easier to bear. Simple as that. Also, autistic children typically have sensory sensitivities. Of course, everybody has sensory sensitivities, but autistic individuals, these can be quite profound, leading them to develop these obsessions and rituals and intense special interests. For example, children may stroke people's hair whenever they can because they enjoy the feeling of it, or it makes them feel calm. And again, little children doing that might be less of a problem. If they're toddlers, an older child or an adult goes up to you and starts stroking your hair when you're in a pub and you've never met this person before, and suddenly start stroking your hair, you're going to naturally feel uncomfortable, but they may not be aware of that. And again, autistic children often have trouble with planning and sequencing, so having a rigid routine may help comfort them. Going again back to planning, that could also be because a lot of autistic people have comorbid, in other words, other conditions. For example, dyslexia affects your ability, negatively affects your ability to plan. ADHD again makes it difficult to remain calm and keep yourself focused. So these things, whilst not in themselves autism, are often alongside one or the other, is often alongside a person being autistic. So in essence, the world is unpredictable and confusing place for autistic people. Many prefer their daily routine so that they know what's going to happen next. There's a comfort in being aware what's going to happen. You know, they always may always want to travel the same way to and from school, or eat exactly the same food for breakfast. Imagine if you're on your way to school or to work, and suddenly, and you're the passenger, or you're walking with somebody, and suddenly the person you're with or the vehicle takes a different turn. You may not then be aware that you're still going to the same destination, because if you're autistic, because you're then going an unfamiliar route. Does that mean you're still going to end up at the right place? Are you going to, or if you do, are you going to get there at the same time? Are you going to get there too early or too late? You know, what's going to what sensory experiences am I going to have by going along this different route? There's lots of different feelings going on there, and that can make it very, very difficult. And again, all of us, autistic or not, have a morning routine, and most people stick with that every single day. It may be maybe subconsciously, which is why transition, when you're something like on holiday, the first day, whether or not you're jet lagged or not, even if it's a local holiday or staycation, can be quite difficult the first morning, because you don't have to get up necessarily early. You don't have to have the same thing for breakfast, and a neurotypical person will adapt to that fairly quickly. An autistic person may find that very, very difficult, because there's comfort in that sameness. If you don't have the same food for breakfast, what do you have? You're on holiday at a hotel, you might have almost limitless choice of food for breakfast, and too much choice can be totally overwhelming for autistic people. So again, how important is your routine? Do you get easily upset by changing routine? Most people get a little bit upset by changing routine, but by nature, humans do have the capacity to adapt. How adaptable a human is very individual, and if you're autistic, again, it's the same. But and obviously, some autistic people are much more adaptable to change than others. But all of them will have some difficulty, or would have had some difficulty when they were younger, and they've learned coping mechanisms in order to adapt to change more readily as they get older. Some may be indifferent to a change of routine. Oh, it doesn't really matter whether I use I don't know, whether I brush my teeth before, before I have a cup of tea or after it, or if I have something totally different for breakfast. But others are not tased at all by change of routine. They may think, oh, such is life. Bring it on. I'm quite fairly adaptable. But most of us do need a certain amount of routine, and autistic people even more so. So what are these sensory difficulties you can have in autism? You can have heightened sensitivity to sound, smell, taste, touch, visual stimulus. And all of these, if you're in a noisy environment, that you've got unfamiliar or strong odors, there's a nasty taste in the air or in the food you're eating, or and you may be in a crowd, so everyone's brushing up against you, so you're also getting that touch. You're getting lots of visual information coming on. All of that combined, or singularly, all those senses being heightened, can result in a sensory meltdown. It's not a tantrum, because a tantrum is something, let's get this out of the way, because people do confuse them. It's not a tantrum, because a tantrum, you are in control. When a child has a tantrum, it's normally because they want their parents to do something, or the teacher to do something. I always scream and shout in the shop, because if I scream and shout for sweets and sweets and sweets and sweets, eventually, if it's no other reason just to shut me up, Mum will give me some sweets, and they've learned that. If I play up, I'll be rewarded, or I might not necessarily be rewarded, but my reward might be to get out this crowd, this shop, because I don't want to go shopping. So either, but an autistic person is not in control of that. All they basically, all those senses have been so overloaded that they can't cope. They're almost in that they either explode or they implode and they go inwards to themselves, and they cannot control. So they may be rocking, they may be very, very quiet and subdued because there's just too much going on. Or they may even be self-harm because there's so much noise going on, they're hitting themselves on the head or head banging or whatever. And again, every autistic person will have a unique sensory profile, and it's easy to think, they've got all autistic people have issues with loud noises. Not all, and again, but even those that do, if they are in control of the sound, they might think, well, little Jimmy doesn't like loud music, but when he's in a room on his own, he plays it really, really loud. This doesn't make sense. Oh, but it does, because when it's in his room and he's playing it, he is in control of the volume. He's the person in control, not the environment outside, not other people. He's in control of that. So it's a very different situation then. And again, when you're having a sensory meltdown, you can feel trapped. And because it's not a tantrum, the child should not be punished for not coping. It's nothing that they can control, and same with adults, they cannot control their senses. If they're in sensory overload, no amount of talking, no amount of cajoling, no amount of reasoning will be able to calm that person until they're out of that environment, or they've calmed themselves down because their body's naturally calmed itself down. So an individual that's autistic may be hyposensitive, which means low, so I remember it, hypersensitive, oversensitive, and all senses may be affected, and overstimulation can be a trigger for these out of the blue reactions. They'll say, oh, why did little Jimmy have that meltdown? Why did little Jimmy present that challenging behavior? Well, it's come from nowhere. Well, no behavior comes out of nowhere, and it could well be there's a trigger that we just haven't spotted, or we're just not attuned to that child or adult's sensory profile and the issues that can cause a sensory meltdown. But again, even though you can have a presentation in which you're hypersensitive, you may be hypersensitive in one sense and hyposensitive in another. You may even be a combination of both on the same sense. For example, you may have a high pain threshold and can walk around with a broken leg, but equally, if the slightest touch, feel of someone brushing against your skin, or little and to something crawling along your hairs of your arm, could be sufficient to cause you pain, the senses of pain. So it's not black and white, and you can have a mixture of the two. So I don't know if this will play. We'll try. This is a video of somebody having a sensory meltdown. Yes, it's playing. I won't play this for too long because you can imagine it is quite distressing. See, that's not a child having a tantrum. That is a child in deep distress, really, headbutting a mum, really, really screaming. Everything is just too much, too much. Mum's trying to calm her, but absolutely nothing is working. She's covering her ears as a sign of frustration as well. I won't play too much of this because I say it's quite distressing and very loud. But you get some idea. Now, some autistic children can do that for an hour on end, and that's not a tantrum. They will just scream like that in a tantrum for an hour because they get in that cycle, that loop of so much sensory overload that they just cannot calm themselves down, and it can be very, very distressing to see, to be honest. So this boy here, picture of this boy here, and again, classic autism behavior, if there is such a thing, covering his ears. And again, which is why a lot of autistic people will wear ear defenders, to shut out some of that noise. They can disseminate, so the sound becomes duller and more, and takes away all those really strong sounds. So Temple Grandin, who is autistic and was a late talker and had lots of issues as a child, and is now one of the leading experts by experience in the field of autism, says here, "My hearing is like a hearing aid with the volume control stuck on super loud. It's like an open microphone that picks up everything. I have two choices: turn the mic on and get deluged with sound, or shut it off." Now, some autistic people, believe it or not, can even hear the sound of dog whistles, those sort of sounds that normally aren't perceptible to the human ear because their senses are so tuned. Or see the beam on a fluorescent light, it goes from A to B, goes flash across really, really fast. I can actually see the beam there. So you may hear this term. My child suffers from something called hyperacusis, which basically means increased sensitivity to sound, which is one of the most common sensory issues amongst autistic people. And a person with severe hyperacusis had difficulty tolerating everyday sounds, some of which may seem unpleasantly or painfully, that's an important word there, painfully loud to that person, but not to others. So not only is it really loud, so they're covering their ears to protect themselves from that, they're actually suffering from physical pain. So when the sound is distressing, the individual may cover their ears and try to turn off the source of the sound, or may become upset or exit the environment. Now, obviously, in exiting the environment, because of the meltdown, they may not have that sense of danger at that particular time, so may run away and potentially into a dangerous situation, like into traffic or whatever. So be aware of those reactions. Support strategies for dealing with auditory hypersensitivity depend on the cause. If it's something you can turn down, turn it down. Simple. Or whatever. Now, as I just mentioned, many people on autistic spectrum experience auditory overload, sounds may boom or cut out altogether, or where there is hyperacusis can be acutely painful. In most cases, a low arousal approach by those supporting the individual or adaptation to the environment may help considerably. Now, low arousal approach, we'll look at more when we look at support strategies on another video. That means remaining calm, using as minimum words as possible, using and allowing that person the opportunity to calm down, rather than heighten their senses by overloading them with sound through your speech while they're already overloaded with sound. As applied to auditory sensitivity, the term hypersensitivity can be misleading. For some, it's not the noise or the noises themselves, but this sheer amount of information. For instance, if it's a loud noise and it's just like I'd say it's an instrument, musical instrument, something that may be bad maybe But imagine if it's a whole orchestra, because then you've may have 40 plus instruments, different instruments, maybe even playing different musical pieces of the same musical composition, maybe even at different pitches, different speeds, etc., different melodies. Imagine that at loud volume. So they've got lots of conflicting loud noises all coming to them in one go, and that can be a major trigger for a sensory meltdown. As Donna Williams, another lady well known in the autism field, who wrote a book Pretending to be Normal, well recommended read, says the underlying cause of hypersensitive reactions may have nothing to do with the perception of pitch or volume, but rather are the result of information processing problems. Distortions can be set off by too much noise, as an overlap in speech, or by hypersensitivity to certain frequencies. The problem of too much sound can be alleviated by the use of active noise cancelling headphones, which eliminate certain pitches and frequencies, or passive headphones, which reduce all sound. For many people, especially children with autism, noise cancelling or reducing headphones can be very effective and needn't be too expensive to purchase. Noise cancelling headphones cost as little as a fiver. Easy to get. Every hardware shop will have them. Every DIY shop will have them. You don't necessarily need to go to the expense of buying something that's specific to special needs, because unfortunately any item for special needs from a special needs catalogue has a massive markup, and it could just be just bog standard um, ear defenders like you see somebody work on a building site, just as good as the top of the range things. So behaviours associated with autism. Some little quotes here. It's just as though he's listening. The only place you'll eat a dinner, sorry, without screaming is in the corridor. She paces around the TV lounge. She doesn't even watch it. He just won't leave the lounge room door open. It's getting absolutely roasting during summer. He's always ruining others' activities. I told him we were going to have a treat instead of the usual day, and he starts shouting and screaming. If he gets cross, she just seems to think it's funny. Why won't she listen? The common sort of things that people might say about a child or an adult's behaviour. So, challenging behaviour. Well, what is challenging behaviour? Well, in a nutshell, it's behaviour that the other person finds challenging. In other words, behaviour that might put the individual themselves or those around them, such as parent or carer, at risk, or leads to a poorer quality of life. Can also impact on their ability to join in everyday activities. Challenging behaviour can include physical or verbal aggression, damage to property, self-harm, socially inappropriate behaviour, and ritualistic or repetitive behaviour. Now, before moving on, I am not a psychologist, but what I do know is that all behaviour is communication. So whenever your child or an adult that's autistic is presenting challenging behaviours, the first thing to ask yourself is, what are they trying to tell you? What are they communicating? Why are they doing this? There's always a reason. There's always a trigger. Sometimes it may take a little digging. Sometimes it's obvious. If it's a noisy environment, you can put two and two together quite easily. But sometimes it requires a little bit of detective work and maybe a repetition of that behaviour for us to really try and understand the context in which that behaviour took place. Examples of physical behaviour, pretty obvious really: hitting, punching, slapping, biting, spitting, throwing objects at a person, hitting a person with an object, threatening to injure or kill, swearing, shouting, directed at, or whether they're swearing or shouting generally, or whether that's directed at, if it's directed at a person. Now, this is the difference between good behaviour and bad behaviour. There is no such thing, purely because not all of these behaviours, but a lot of these behaviours you would see on a rugby field, on a football pitch, or the top ones, hitting, punching and slapping, wrestling, boxing. People get paid, well paid, but for basically knocking 5 bells out of somebody, or 10 bells out of somebody even. So it's not the behaviour, it's the social context that's the problem. Throwing objects at a person. Well, you might be a bit slapstick, go to see the circus and you see clowns throwing custard pies at one another. Well, that's it. Or hitting a person in the face with an object. That's hilariously funny. But if it's done in a different context, in a normal everyday behaviour, you pick up your computer mouse and hit your wife or somebody else around the head with it, totally socially inappropriate behaviour. So it's the context that makes a behaviour, even if it's a physical aggression, inappropriate and challenging. Other examples: punching, scratching or kicking. Damage to property can include punching, scratching, kicking objects, throwing objects, chewing or biting clothing. Very frequent. And when my children were at school, all of their school uniforms had lots of bite marks and around the neck, kind of doing this all the time, or their sleeves, and the bottom of the sleeves, or or their they made my daughter quite a couple of occasions tried to flush her school uniform down the toilet, so that way she couldn't go to school. breaking objects, dismantling objects, writing or drawing on the walls, etc. One of my earliest memories of myself, for example, was I got a red marker pen, I think it was, I don't know, or crayon, and I went all around the house when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and drew as good a line as I could, right on the middle, the wall, all along the wall in the living room and the passage, the hallway. Worst possible place, because you can't just replace a little bit of wallpaper, you've got to replace the whole lot. I should imagine my parents were well pleased with my artwork there. So but then again, that in itself, you can say, oh, that's socially inappropriate behavior, that's damaging a property. But graffiti in the right context can be considered an art form, and it's not socially appropriate. So again, it can be very, very confusing for autistic people because they don't always understand the social concept. No, why can't you paint on a wall? But when you decorate, you paint on the wall. You know, if you're some sort of artist will paint murals on a wall, they're painting on a wall. So it's not the action or the behavior, it's a social context that be quite difficult for sometimes for people to understand. Again, self-harming tip, one of the most common ones is this. Sometimes that is because of severe anxiety. Sometimes it's just for the sensory buzz, the sensory sensation of the feeling that they get from that. And obviously you see a lot of autistic children, particularly those at the more severe end of the autism spectrum, will have lots of calluses where they've been biting their fingers, biting their hands many times. Punching, slapping, hitting or biting themselves, cutting or burning the skin, making scratch marks like this, biting the nails. I certainly bit my nails till they were red raw when I was a child. Head banging, induced vomiting, self-starvation or binge eating, suicidal tendencies. These are all behaviors that autistic people may indulge in, and some of them obviously are very disturbing to witness as a parent or carer. Other examples of appropriate behaviors, the old, a little root under there, nose picking. Again, if it's in your own home, it's in your own room and nobody else is watching, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So don't always discourage these behaviors, but discourage them from happening in public. Now, if they feel the need to do it, go out of the room, get a tissue, whatever, so you're not stopping doing it. Smearing of feces, inappropriate urination. I used to support somebody that would, when I worked in day service, that used to urinate in the, sometimes without us even noticing, would urinate in the indoor plants, or would urinate in a radiator. And if it's in the radiator, it's particularly bad because we didn't realize until the radiators came on in the autumn or winter time that foul smell coming from them. Lovely. Shouting, again, shouting out loud. Again, some autistic people also have Tourette's, which again cause them to have tics and outbursts as well. Name calling, not always be aware that what you're calling somebody is inappropriate. Bullying type behaviors. Picker behaviors. Picker behaviors are things like is eating well, put my teeth in inedible objects. For instance, they might be eating stones, twigs, paper, feces. I met somebody that used to eat the tops of molehills and say, "Do you want a bit, Dave?" No, thanks. Anything. And again, these are quite common behaviors in autism, particularly at the more severe end. Repetitive behaviors can be things like hand flapping or clicking the fingers, pacing, running, rocking, very common thing. And again, you try that. If you're watching this, you try this a little bit. Actually, whether you're autistic or not, is quite a pleasant experience. It helps to self-regulate yourself in space, and it's quite a nice thing. And it's also something that people in extreme stress will do. But sometimes autistic people do this because they're in extreme stress. Sometimes they do it because they simply enjoy doing it. It's not always the fact that they're stressed. Jumping, walking around on tiptoes, lying objects, and again, it's the amount of time that they spend doing these activities rather than in themselves being repetitive. It's the amount of time that they're doing them. Screaming or shouting out, covering ears. You know, they may constantly walking around with their ears, covering their ears like that. Repeating words and phrases. Repeating words and phrases. Repeating words and phrases. I mean, I've said that 3 times. I should imagine if I said that 20 times, you would be quite annoyed. I supported someone that would say things like, what coloured ears has Mickey Mouse got? And you'd have to say black ears and go, black ears, black ears, black ears, black ears, black ears. Or another person would say, David had a lovely meal. What's what meal you had today, David? David had a bad bit. And that'd be like that for the full 6 hours at the day service. So, and again, it's that sort of comfort from that repetition, from that. Again, it's about being in control of their environment, because it's the environment is so confusing that they keep control of the environment, keep themselves together by getting familiarity and relief from repetition and ritualistic behaviors. So that's the end of today's presentation. So thank you for listening. Please review my business on Google, follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter, and my YouTube page, Wired for Autism Presents. And I hope to see you soon at another of these presentations. In the meantime, feel free to leave your comments below, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.